All right. Thanks for coming on, you two, Vince and Jay. Appreciate you all taking the time to come speak with us here. It's been fun to kind of get people on and talk about audio stuff every week because I've been like missing mixing and doing gigs. So nice to have you guys on and talk about this stuff. So would you mind giving me a quick introduction, Vincent, first, please?
I'll go first. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been mixing audio for a lot of years now. I started in small clubs, late 90s, early 2000s. I had a recording studio in Chicago for a lot of years. And to meet bands, I started kind of learning how to mix live to meet bands in venues to work with in the studio. And uh, things kind of just progressed from there. And the past few years, I've been working with Maroon 5. I've known Jay for a long time, but we mixed Prince together around 2015. I think that's about when it was. And yeah, excited to talk about audio for an hour.
Cool, Jay. Can you give us an introduction about
yourself? Yeah,
kind
of same story as everyone else. You know, started out in like middle school, high school. Kind of owned our own sound company a little bit. Started working for a small regional company, then worked for a bigger regional company. Got a house gig over at Terminal 5 in New York City, which is like a 3,000 cap club, which, Scott, I think we might have even met over there. I'm not sure.
I think we did, yeah.
I actually met Francois, the monitor engineer who I tour with now over there when he did 3 nights of Passion Pit. And at the end of the first night, brought me a tray full of Sea Breezes, Francois' signature drink. And it was love at first sight. We've been together ever since. And then from there, just started touring with bands and kind of got out on the road and meeting different bands and met Vince. And then I knew my life was over once I met Vince. So.
Well, it's funny because like freelance audio guys, I always end up kind of doing the same stuff. I worked at Terminal 5 too, and Vince, I used to own a studio in Chicago as well. What years were you there?
You were my competition then.
Yeah, I guess I was.
I don't know, man. I guess I lived in Chicago for a lot of years, but I had the early 2000s to about 2011.
Right.
There was a really good scene at the time there. I know that those things kind of changed through time, but it was really cool at the time to be working. And there were also a lot of other studios that had great analog gear and some really great rooms. My place was pretty modest, and but you could get it done there. So
what was it called?
It was just like kind of a private studio. It wasn't something that I advertised well. So
that's a terrible name, Vince.
Yeah,
that's probably why
you kind of had to, maybe.
Yeah, I had a place called Semaphore over there in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, it's tons of analog gear, 2-inch Atari MTR 90 and the Ampex ATR 102 for mixdown and huge Neotech console. It was fun, and we were able to kind of keep it going as a business for a few years.
Yeah,
and then it just kind of like mid 2000s, it all kind of fell apart.
Well, those were weird times, and I think that like being in weird times now, it's kind of cool to reflect on that because ultimately it was never my goal to mix live sound. In fact, I didn't even really know that was a job. I didn't even really know what those people did. It was literally like playing at small bars and clubs and being like, well, what does that guy do? Oh, he works with a bunch of different bands. I have the studio. It makes sense. So, but in the early 2000s, the record industry was completely bottoming out, and so we don't know what's going to happen after this, but who knows?
Well, I think the one thing a lot of people are realizing is that getting together in the same place to do whatever, watch sports or watch music or whatever, is really fun, and people miss it. I think there is a magic about being in the same room as a bunch of people experiencing.
Yeah, I mean that's what got me into this to begin with. Ultimately.
Yeah, totally. So I'm sure we'll have some good attendance shows when we get back to this, get back to doing gigs. But
that's real quick. Did both of you guys start out as recording guys and then moved into live sound, or were you kind of doing both at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like one was feeding the other, really. So, but the intention was always to just stay in the studio. I don't know about you, Scott, but that's kind of where I started.
It was parallel for me. I was buying some recording gear and also working I thought about recording as my primary thing. That is what I wanted to do. But when, just like live shows were so much easier to get work, it was.
It's just also way more exciting. I mean, I know, we're kind of going off whatever, but I know Jay's been doing a lot of broadcast stuff lately, and if you can kind of combine the surgical precision of a studio setting with just like the excitement of what live sound is, like that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
But this is the one thing that I kind of go back to a lot is just if you're in the studio, you might record 10,000 songs to see a hit song, or maybe never. But the cool thing about working in live sound, especially when you work with artists that you like, is that you're literally mixing hit songs every single night, which is like there's no other situation that you could possibly do that. You're kind of at the very end of the chain in a really cool sense.
Yeah,
or if you're mixing Prince, then you're mixing no hit songs because he refuses to play any of them the entire time you're there. So.
Okay, so let's talk about this Prince gig. What were you guys doing at the? You were touring at the same time with him. What was the situation?
I mean, Jay, why
Tell me
don't
some
you start it
stories.
off? Because I came in well after Jay was being held captive,
Tortured
in the Purple Palace. Yeah.
I mean, listen, it's not a story unlike anyone else's. Everyone under the sun has mixed Prince, or been Princed, or I don't know, been held captive at Paisley Park against their will. But I got sent up to Prince prison. I think January 2015, and to replace the engineer who was up there because he had to move on to do another gig. And I was up there for a while, then quickly realized that it was a 2-person gig because we were, oh man, there's so many. So Prince did not believe in a monitor console. So everything, he didn't believe in monitors really. I mean, he actually didn't even believe in a front of house guy, but he understood the necessity to have someone stand behind an audio console so sound came out of the speakers so he could play shows. But he believed that every front of house engineer, audio engineer was just sent there to sabotage his shows so that he couldn't go on tour. So anyways, we had a Midas XL4, big, 56 channel analog console up front that was not only mixing front of house, but also was feeding all of the monitor mixes on stage, which consisted of 8 wedge mixes, stereo side fills, and 4 of the musicians on stage had in-ear mixes as well, all being dialed off of the one console. And I would say probably 85 to 99% of the time that the musicians on stage had no idea of what they were playing or what they couldn't hear anything because Prince didn't understand this concept of the fact that if you touch something on the console, it affects everything. So he'd just walk up behind us some days, be like, "That's not enough gain," and just ramp up the gain or start playing the EQ, and everyone on stage just like ripping their ears out. Anyways, sorry, I was getting sidetracked, but quickly realized needed someone else. So it was through 8th Day. So talked to Tom Marco, and he's like, I'm like, do you got to say someone else? He's like, well, everyone else is busy. I don't have anyone else, but I do have this guy, Vince, who keeps bugging me to do gigs. He's got a really cool haircut and he loves phase. So I'm going to send him up there. And Vince came up and we kind of tag teamed it together for the next 3 months. And hilarity ensued, and we learned to drink martinis because it was the highest alcohol content thing we could find to calm ourselves down after.
Off campus though, because
hours.
Paisley Park was both vegan and sober.
Yes.
At least for us.
Yeah. Very
Wow.
true.
I mean, like there's nothing around there though, Paisley Park. It's like out in the middle of nowhere.
People think Prince and they think Minneapolis, but it's not Minneapolis. It's cornfields and like very sparse suburbia. I mean, there's a lake. And we were on a 10-minute call. So basically, more or less, we were told that if we get a call day or night, 24 hours a day, and you can't be there in 10 minutes, just don't bother coming. So, there was really no leaving. The leash was as short as any leash could be, really.
But you get called to go over there and be like, you'd be like, get the message, be like, rehearsals in 10 minutes. And so you're like, jump in the car, speed over there. And then there is a electric gate that to outside Paisley. So you go and park across the street in this like children's daycare parking lot where you can just kind of peek around and see the gate if it was open. And sometimes you'd show up and he'd open it right at like 2 p.m. He never woke up before 2 p.m. ever. So he'd like open it right up. But sometimes I swear he would like be out, like you would wait there for like 3 hours for him to open this gate. And then like he would actually physically have to come outside with a garage door opener and open the gate for us to come in.
And then he would stick like a newspaper in the door so we could get it.
Yeah, and then you go in a park, and then there's a door to get into where the big sound stage, the full-on sound stage, and just like imagine an arena without any seats. That's where we rehearsed, and there's a bunch of recording sessions. We'd show up there, like either the door would be propped open with like a newspaper or a pencil, or we'd show up and the door would be locked, and then we'd sit in our cars for another hour waiting, and every 20 minutes we'd send someone to check the door, and finally like an hour later we'd come over and be propped open with a pencil, and it's like he wouldn't be like, hey guys, come in. It was just like him like army crawling up to the door, pushing it open, putting a pencil in, the whole entire thing, which is a mind game. So that's why Vince and I are so screwed up now.
Yeah, it wasn't from anything that happened before that.
Yeah, and anything past Prince, it's like, oh, this is nothing. Anytime like an artist or a singer or anything is like, you know, having a little meltdown or something happen, it's just like, you know, you have nothing on Prince. It's, you know, try again.
I mean, so when he got too involved in the console, like if he starts walking over and changing stuff, I mean, what are you gonna do, right?
You know, so the first time I had like a serious interaction with Jay, because Jay had been there and knew a lot of the idiosyncrasies before I showed up, and me and Jay, you know, a lot of engineers, it's very rare over the course of a career where you're actually going to be sharing a console with another engineer. Obviously, a lot of reasons why that's going to be a terrible experience. Most engineers are super protective about the way they work. They're not flexible. There's no reason why two guys should be, you know, shoulder to shoulder on a mixing console. But, you know, Jay and me, fortunately, we really hit it off, and he was super gracious, and he had kind of everything figured out into all of Prince's idiosyncrasies. So one of the things, on a technical note, is that if you walked up and you kind of like proper gain structure, put all the faders at unity and then gained up to create a mix, and then high pass filters, all the normal things that you would do to create a good mix, every single one of those things would show to Prince that you had no clue what you were doing. So Jay had kind of like learned his way through this and realized that it was all about hitting the gain hard, mostly seeing all the red lights, and all the faders are down at like -80, you know, ready to like, like breeze could change your whole mix. So I show up and I'm like, what is going on here? So
great first impression for Vince to walk up. Vince is like, man, who the heck is this guy? Like, master fader in the XL4 pushed up to +10, because Prince coming from the recording world and being like, you know, anything without the fader, the master up the, you know, all the way to the top, because that was 0 in recording studio. Anything else was attenuation, and attenuation was like the devil's work.
Dude, there's so many great stories on that. We would talk about the Prince mod distressor, but before I get to that, just to finish the thought, my first situation with Jay and like how do you handle Prince touching a mixing console? Essentially, maybe like a week or two in, Prince walks up to the console at the beginning of the day, and he talks in the mic. He has the band play 32 bars or something, and he looks over, doesn't know my name yet. He said, "You, sir," always very polite, always very proper. Sir, you guys are doing this all wrong. And he proceeds to zero the entire console, the entire XL4, and put a mix back up together very quickly. That sounded very good. No surprises. I mean, the dude was an amazing engineer as well. And he looks over at me, he says, "Sir, you have 32 bars, make this mix better." And I'm like, I'm looking at Jay, I'm like, it sounds great. You know, it sounds fine. I'm like, so I'm standing there, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll EQ the overhead, something completely inconsequential, because what do I do? It sounds great. He's like, no. He looks over at Jay, said, "Jay, get in there and show this man how we want it to sound." You know, so immediately he has pitted us against each other. And for the next hour and a half, and I think I was just drenched in sweat by the time it was all done, we were just trading off 32 bars to make the mix better.
It was right out of the movie Whiplash, like straight up right out of the movie Whiplash. I mean, there was actually a point, I think, when he grabbed the towel when you and I were having a mix off to the band playing Brick House, and he's grabbed the towel, he's like, "Whiplash! Whiplash! Oh my gosh, it's Whiplash!" Like, what is going on? He's like wearing like a one-piece silken purple thing with like a hood on it, like it's like, like light up LED. Yeah. I mean, anyways, sorry. We can go.
I've been in that soundstage. I've been in that soundstage before. It's a huge room. It doesn't sound that good in there, right? I mean,
no.
I mean,
anyway,
I don't know. It doesn't sound yes and no. I mean, we had some good mixes. You had a great mix. When I walked in, it sounded great. It was loud.
Vince.
It was absurdly loud. I mean, but part of the reason with that is too is that he had two double stacked. His guitar rig was like two on each side. It was like two double stacked cabinets of 412s pointed in like an equilateral triangle at an SM58. And so to get that vocal above, to get anything above those guitars, it was like it was crushingly loud in there.
The heads, the Soldano heads, I'm not kidding, they were on 11. Like he had the heads, they had the heads modded, so they went to 11, and they were on 11. Like it was the loudest thing.
Everything was done. Every knob in that entire complex was turned all the way to the right. That is just funny. The whole building, it's amazing.
No attenuation.
Yeah,
no attenuation.
Work.
After Vince and I both departed up there, they brought in this another guy that we're now friends with to do it, and he didn't really know like the whole story about the whole thing and like what to say, because you had to know like what to say, what not to say, and like one word can just trigger like an apocalypse or a pandemic. It's probably this is probably Prince why we're not here right now. Prince ate the bat, but. He's like, and Prince like, there's no attenuation, right? He's like, well, like everything's as loud as it can go. And this guy it was all D80, DMB D80 amplifiers with a DMB line array. He's like, well, amps are at 0, but they can go to +6, like, which you would never ever do, like, of course, 0, 0. And Prince is like, what? Like, freaks out. I'm not exaggerating. He made the set carp build a cage around the amp rack.
Metal cage, welded.
He's like, I went to the production room. I was like, you need to build a shark cage around these amplifiers so they can't be attenuated with. Like, obviously, it's all remote control over here on and they built a metal shark cage around the amp rack.
So it was like, I mean, man, there is like the through line was fear of sabotage and loyalty, and I think that was what's so fascinating about it. Like putting people against each other. He would oftentimes make jokes at other. It was very interesting. There were times where he would like kind of joke on people to see, are you going to laugh at your friend or to make me happy, or are you going to stand by this guy? And I like he was constantly kind of testing, Jay and my loyalty to each other and to him at the same time. And obviously, like every situation was kind of mostly in a hilarious manner designed to be kind of a catch-22, where whichever way you went, you were boxed into a corner. And for me, that's like the funny thing of that whole experience is that there was almost no way. I don't know, man. I mean, it was 5 years later, and I'm still laughing about this stuff every single day.
But you know what, Scott? I think the interesting part about this is it brought Vince and I together as friends. And it got cold up there. It got real cold.
It got real cold.
Yeah, and Prince, he was cash poor, so everyone had to share a room. It was very odd. Yeah, it was actually a lot like that show Waco I just watched. I kind of felt a lot of similarities to that. But anyways,
all right. So,
but it did. What I was going to say, in all seriousness, it did. We came out with so many, like when we came out of it we were scarred, but I learned so many lessons about how to deal with an artist on that caliber, how to say like in a political situation, how to kind of just stay down the center, and also learned a couple of really cool audio things coming out of that. But I feel like that really helped me down the road with other artists I work for to know how to kind of handle a situation and make it out.
Yeah, it's like a huge part of our jobs, right? Especially working for artists. When you're not like working for a sound company or whatever, you're working for people that are kind of used to a certain point getting what they want, and having, a lot of them tend to surround themselves with people that say yes and treat them well. Of course, like, I would do the same thing, but
as the gigs get bigger and bigger too, that relationship you had maybe with an artist when you were working with a smaller band or in the van and trailer tour, that kind of really a lot of times disappears just by fact of you never even see the artist. They're on the completely own schedule. So
totally.
I feel like a lot of times the bigger the gig gets, the more that separation becomes, and your interaction becomes so short that if there is that one like weird thing that happens, that might be the one time you see the artist for 2 weeks. So
totally.
Again, that Prince thing really helped me learn how to handle all those situations.
Yeah, I remember getting the first time I got kicked out of an artist's dressing room. It's like, don't I get to use this too? Oh wait, no,
Yeah.
the gig had gotten big enough where it's like, that's not my space at all. Like,
Yeah.
get out of there.
That was the funny thing about Prince, though. There was no boundaries. I mean, he could bring you basically into the back chambers of Paisley Park just to, just to kind of yell you, or into his dressing room pre-show while he was like sprinkling himself with pixie dust and putting on his makeup. And in a way, there was a lot of accessibility there in a way that I've never really seen since.
That's interesting. Well, it definitely is a good skill to learn, handling artists,
Oh yeah.
what to say, and you come up with your things.
Sometimes it's even more important than the actual mixing part of it.
And what's great about two engineers is I just blame Jay for everything that went wrong.
There you go.
Yeah. Which actually most of the time was my fault too. So it was okay.
All right. So since we're talking about loud volumes, stage volume, maybe do you guys have any tips for keeping loud stage volumes out of lead vocal mics? What's your kind of go-to trick? I know Jay, probably Queens of the Stone Age, you got to worry about that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because Prince was, like we saying, that was the crazy with those double 4x12 cabs, and then from that, what did I do after? I did a Dream Theater, which was like there was no sound on stage whatsoever. 1975, the first album cycle, we had guitar amps, and then they were screaming loud when me and Francois came in, so we slowly moved them further off stage, and we slowly turned them down, and then I think we finally got them to go into ISO cabs by the end of it, which is great. But that's something you can't always do. I mean, we ended up being there long enough and got their trust that we were able to talk them into putting the guitar cabs into ISO cabs. ISO cabs, for anyone who doesn't know, mean you take the guitar cab, you put it in a completely foamed out box off the stage with the microphone in it, close the lid, and then you can't really hear the guitar cab anymore. Yeah. And then Queens of the Stone Age, I took over that gig kind of a quarter of the way into that album cycle, and that is just it's like all the guitar amps on stun, but they all sound fantastic. So you can't go up to Josh Homme and be like, hey, you got to turn your guitar amp down. That's never gonna happen.
I think that's a really good point, man. A lot of it is working with what you're given, and just accepting that it's not your. But on the
Queens thing, the simple what it was originally, all the guitar amps just in a straight line, all facing downstage, which in turn really all these amps just firing like a laser beam right at me at front of house. The simple act of just slightly turning the amps on stage or off stage a little bit just completely cleaned it up, and you almost even able to like aim them out of the vocal mic, like you're saying.
A few degrees makes a big difference. Yeah, guitar amps are super direct.
And then this when we came in, because again, Francois and I started on the gig at the same time. There was a crazy side fill rig that they weren't really using, but they was just blasting because guys are all on ears. So Francois was slowly able to pretty much turn the side fill tops off and just use the subs, and that helped me a ton. It's an interesting thing, the whole, and probably you and Francois talked about it a couple weeks ago, but the whole thing where the whole band's on ears, but then there's these flown line array side fills on the stage just blasting noise everywhere. And if you're able to work with a monitor guy who's cool with getting rid of that, I mean, that makes such a difference in the world as well.
Yeah, it's all about working as a team with that stuff for sure.
Yeah.
And like getting on the same page and like having a goal, and like trying to let's clean up the vocal. What can we do? And working together to kind of like find the right solution. Yeah.
Well, Vince, speaking of that, for you, I know we've talked about this the other day. On Maroon 5, you were saying that Adam is pretty much out in front of the PA the entire show. So how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, for the last half a decade of my career, I haven't had a singer behind the PA. We've talked about this at length.
Well, first of all, what mic are you using for Adam?
It's a 58, just a wireless 58. We're using the Accent Shure stuff right now, and that's like another great question. That wasn't my pick. I wasn't consulted on it, and I didn't give an opinion because I wasn't asked. And ultimately, I feel like if a 58 is good enough for Prince, definitely good enough for Adam Levine, and it's good enough for everybody. Everyone has opinions about which vocal mics work, but the $100 capsule, if you can't get that to work, and I think this is the one, everyone's looking for gear or a trick or a tip. to fix an underlying issue. You need to fix the underlying issue and then go from there. So you know, Adam Levine's got a great voice, and it's also a really strong voice. So cool. But I've had other situations where it's not. I mean, part of what I have going for me in the Maroon 5 setup is that we're carrying PA almost entirely all the time, and I can work with my systems engineer to get a really Matt McQuaid, I don't know, I mean, maybe he's watching this or not, but if he isn't, like, really phenomenal systems guy who we can work with to get super linear coverage throughout the ramp, so the frequency response doesn't change as Adam Levine or whoever would walk into the next box. And I think it's also really important to, if you're making EQ decisions for the worst case scenario, then 90% of your time, your mix is going to sound garbled or dull because you've taken too much away for that 10% of the time you're so terrified about. So I think it's important. Sometimes I'll have an EQ layer that I might pop in when he's in a weird part of the thrust. But for the most part, it's dangerous to kind of like always be preparing yourself for the worst case scenario and forgetting about the majority of the time where it just needs to sound good.
Yeah, totally. I mean, working with the systems engineer has got to be totally crucial on that with the ramp, you know, or with the thrust.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the way I look at it, man, is that like it's, again, and maybe this is years from working in clubs and not having those luxuries and being the only person that drove the van, loaded the gear, settled the show, and got to mix it, you know. Is that like you with loud guitar amps and bands, is that like I don't look at pop mixes as vocals here and band here. I look at them together, and I think that's really important. You want it to be a complete thing. You don't want to, if when you're mixing, if you're just focused on like one element of the mix, you definitely, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I mix a lot of pop stuff too. I mean, you have to hear the vocal, but for me, it's maybe more like carving more EQ out of stuff that might interfere with it rather than just kind of like pushing it up, you know? Like,
yeah.
Push the fader, like really create space in the mix for it. And
yeah, that's the lazy way, especially with all the headroom that we have, and it doesn't create a complete mix for everyone in the room.
Yeah. So have you guys used primary source enhancers? I mean, I've been touring with those because Heim, one of the bands I mix, you know?
Yeah.
They have a Shure endorsement, and there's like three girls downstage that do not sing loudly at all. They're pretty quiet. And I tried a bunch of different Shure mics for them. I tried condensers. I tried like whatever, like all their options. And I came back to Beta 58s. I mean, that's kind of what sounds best for them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that was, you know, it's like, oh yeah, like this really simple, cheaper option actually works best. But in any case, yeah, I've been using primary source enhancers for them, the Neve 5045s. If people want to look them up, it's kind of a vocal gate sort of thing.
It is. It's just a really smooth sounding one. And to be perfectly honest, that's like next to my console of choice. It's the only real important spec piece of gear for a pop show at this point. Yeah, so I totally agree with that one.
What is your console of choice these days? What are you touring with?
I've been a Digico guy for a long time. I had back in my early touring days. I mean, this is kind of funny to admit, but I did learn how to mix on analog, you know, which doesn't seem that long ago, but the first digital touring console I took out was a Digico SD8. I had a good friend from Chicago, Adam Robinson, that really kind of pushed me into that path when those consoles were they were kind of deemed to be temperamental or expensive, but they really were 10 years ahead of everybody else. And a lot of other manufacturers have made great progress in that time. I think it's really important to be able to be competent on anything, because you guys know, like, you get a call last minute. I remember starting with Tegan and Sarah years ago, and I just had to take over a show file on a Yamaha. I even forget what it was, but I had to just show up and do it. And so it's the Digico stuff's great, but you really have to maintain competencies in the rest of the stuff.
Do you know who was mixing Tegan and Sarah right before you were?
Yeah, it was Scotty Baldwin, who's a phenomenally talented engineer. Also, I think he probably mixed Prince longer than any single other engineer. Yeah, and he started as his drum tech, if I'm not mistaken, and worked his way up to be like his longest standing front of house engineer. He's a Yamaha guy, and it's like I would never turn. If you're turning down work because you don't feel confident on something, that's 100% on you, you know. So
100%. A good friend of mine from Chicago, or old boss actually from Chicago, Stan Doty. He's mixed Wilco forever, but he was like 100% analog, and he would always be carrying the, you know, Midas, you know, which I love mixing on analog too, and that's how I learned. I remember the first time I got my hands on a Midas Heritage console, I was like floored, like, this thing is so cool. It's easy
mode. It really is.
And they sound great, but you know, and he had the, they were willing to pay for shipping getting the console everywhere, and they don't do a lot of like international touring. So, I think for their model, it kind of worked. But then at one point he told me, he's like, I just felt like sound guys should know how to run all the consoles. So he took out a different console for each tour and learned all of them. I thought that was really cool.
Jay's been working on the SSL live platform now for a few years. Pretty good success with that.
It's so cool. Jay, can you tell us about that platform?
I was carrying an analog console, an XL4 for a while. And for any of the fly stuff, I'd use Digico, or stuff like, it just wasn't, feasible to carry an analog console, which is realistically everything these days. But, I was stubborn. And then I took over for a buddy of mine. I was covering for him on the War on Drugs, and it was an SSL console, and they already had him out there on tour. So I didn't have a choice. I had to use it. And originally I had seen the things come out. I'm like, what is this weird spaceship looking console? There's like faders up here, and it's silver, and I don't know, fear change. Like, what is, Vince always talked about SSL back in his recording studio days. So that made me want to use it even less. But yeah, I got on the thing, and right away, and the console just sounded like the XL4. Like, it just had all that low mid warmth, and once you kind of, it wasn't any new thing. As soon as you get the layout figured out, and you get your workflow figured out, it's pretty easy. And I kind of fell in love with it then. And after that I got the Queens of the Stone Age gig, so I spec'd it on that. And then I've actually literally had the same control package, like console and rack and everything, out for like the past 3 years. Just been moving kind of from gig to gig.
Do you guys get technical with like outboard stuff here? I'd be curious to hear what's in the second component of your, probably equally as important is the outboard gear you're using in that setup.
Yeah,
like, is that in the scope of this stuff?
That's a Scott question. No, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth getting into that stuff? I would kind of be curious to know.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you asked. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I love talking about outboard gear. I kind of have like a hybrid setup, and I guess it's kind of left over from my days of mixing on the analog console, where I don't really need any of this stuff per se. I could pull it off within the console. It's actually interesting because a good buddy of mine, Coop, who mixes Bastille, he uses just
phenomenal sounding mix, by the way.
Phenomenal sounding mix, but he uses just a digital console with nothing. I'm talking like he walks out there with a console and some kind of weird stuffed animal and just comes and crushes these shows. But what it actually makes sense now, Vince, what you said about Digico, when you're like, it's temperamental and expensive, because that explains Coop to a T as a person. So,
if I had to pick two things to be,
anyways, so yeah, you could totally pull it off without it. For me, I have a rack of some outboard pieces left over for the XL4 that I just like being able to look over and see exactly what's happening and just grab a knob and right away instead of having to dig. So I've got a GML parametric EQ on the left right that I kind of like per song will tweak stuff just to kind of get the mix to sit how I want to. There's I have a distressor on the lead vocal, a distressor and a BSS 901, which is like a multi-band. It's like the analog version of a C6, I guess you could say.
What's your distressor? And I know you're flying through this here, but I've never been able to make a distressor work on a vocal. I think it's great kick and snare bus. I mean, do you run it kind of more as an opto or what? I mean,
no, I do it kind of. I have like a pretty slow attack on it. I think this attack's at like 6.5, and then a really quick release, like 1.5 to 2. So kind of it gets out of the way pretty quick. And I'm not crushing it by any means. It's kind of just catching some of the like the real crazy stuff.
When I toured with distressors, using them for vocals, I've run it almost exactly the same way. I used to do it with Passion Pit. It worked great for his vocal, Michael's vocal. But yeah, distressors are one of those things you see so many people travel with them because there's like no real plug-in or whatever that can do.
Yeah, I remember Vince, you had distressors on, was it AWOL Nation?
I did, yeah. I mean, that's taking it way back. I think I didn't even remember that. But and this is a funny thing about that gear. Everybody
I've been
loves to see.
stalking you your whole
Yeah.
life. I know everything you've done.
Everybody likes to see all the lights light up, but it just stretches like an interesting point in that I mean, the metering on it is not logarithmic; it's actually linear, and I think it's easy to just like hit stuff hard. And that's one of the lessons I learned at that time with it. That AWOL Nation was like I owned a bunch of outboard gear at the time. Was very much into the analog outboard gear, way more so than I am now. But we didn't have UAD back then, and even waves was another thing that would break a lot. And so what I had was a distressor, and honestly, as I listened back to some of those board tapes now, it was way over compressed. That dude could scream and sing very loud, so I had that going for me, but it brought the noise floor up almost equal. I mean, I was really working with the bleed, and it was a chaotic kind of crushing sounding mix at the time, but it's such a narrow set of circumstances that would actually work in. Also, the only at that point in my life, that was the only one piece of gear that I couldn't do without was the Allen Smart C2 in what is that mode, like destroy mode, crush mode. Yeah. That was on the left, right. And wow, if you have to mix an aggressive rock situation, that's a good go-to.
So yeah, Jay, you said on your master bus you had a parametric EQ.
I have a parametric and I have an Allen Smart C2 as well.
Okay.
I don't mix into it. I kind of have it there. If I get like an arena that's really reverberant, and I kind of want to start controlling some of those dynamics, so I'm not just exciting this giant hockey arena. I can kind of control it there. Or you get to some of these places in Europe that have a crazy dB limit, and try to kind of just bring your whole mix to squash it a little bit to get within like an LEQ, a level over a certain amount of time. So that helps with that as well. It's kind of just there as like as a safety kind of thing, Yeah.
You know what I've been playing around with is the SSL Fusion.
Everyone keeps telling me about that. Yeah.
So cool. I mean, even just like the little bit of brightness, like the little air EQ, like high end, man, it's really sweet. So worth playing around with. Certainly, I think.
Yeah,
I was planning on taking one out all year, but
yeah. Our buddy Steve Curtin, who mixes Beyonce and what's her name, Jennifer Lopez. Is that a person?
Yeah,
Jennifer. Yeah.
No.
He's always been C2 into a creamliner, the Sonic Farm creamliner, and that creamliner just kind of adds the same thing, a bit of high end, bit of air, and he's actually swapped that out for the Fusion, and he loves the SSL Fusion as well.
That's a cool piece.
If anyone from SSL is watching, I use your consoles, and I'd love to try this thing out. So
hey,
hashtag help me.
I actually do want to. Well, I know a couple people over at SSL. I don't know. It would be cool to get one of their consoles, do some demos with it. Maybe someday here. Yeah. Vince, do you do any like master bus processing when you're touring? Yeah.
Always and forever, and I feel like. Especially with PAs that have a lot of headroom, kind of coming up mixing in clubs where you're always just pushing into an amp, and compression is such a part of music as we know it now. It's funny, every time I hear like an album, I went on this kick early on in this quarantine of I was just trying to listen to music from 1972, just incredible year of music. But you listen to those masters now, and if they haven't been remastered, man, it's like there's things like just a million miles back in the mix, and we've gotten so used to now to everything just being in your face, especially through the loudness wars that have kind of faded a little bit. And maybe I'm a product of that, or maybe I just realized that I want to have as quiet a mix as possible that is hitting as hard as possible. I'm trying to do 101 a weighted average over time. That's what I'm trying to do, and as much of the place as I can. And so it's crucial to have like, I do a lot of bus compression, and then I do master compression as well. For me, it almost doesn't matter. Like I said, I love the C2 stuff, very colored. And if you don't want that flavor on there, then, I mean, everyone's making something now from the SSL you're talking about to it's a cool little piece of gear. If you have budget for one piece of analog gear in your rack, it might as well be that, or maybe a vocal compressor. So, but nowadays I'm using UAD, I think, on the master, and I'm going, if I'm not mistaken, I think with Maroon 5 these days at the moment, I've tried the Waves Max BCL, the Neve 2-channel master, And now I think I'm just software, and I'm trying to remember what comp, but the Sonics Oxford Inflator is the last thing in my chain to add that air.
Yeah.
And that thing is brilliant if you're just looking for a little bit of polish on a mix.
Yeah, I was using that a bit last year. Actually, Jay, when you were out and I was doing Coachella, you came by for my mix. I was using that inflator. I don't know, kind of.
Yeah, you use a lot of the Sonic stuff, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or
Like pretty much all the reverbs I've been using
Okay.
and all the Sonic stuff. I like the way those reverbs sound and just kind of.
I always wanted to ask you, actually, not to flip the script, but I mean, I've seen you mix Heim like and it's interesting because you said those vocals, they don't sing very loud, and that could have fooled me because anytime I've seen you mix them, it's those those vocal harmonies are just like right in your face, and the mix is slamming, but it's like 100 dB. It's like this exactly what Vince is talking about. Vince, you should go watch Scott mix because he's doing what you're trying to do. So you know.
Okay, cool.
Maybe
Thanks.
check it.
2021, give me a call.
Yeah. No, but what are you doing for those vocals to get them to all pop out the way they do, and be so even in those harmonies?
Honestly, it's like it's one plugin that I feel like really gets me the vocal trick with those girls. It's the essentially the DSP C6 equivalent. It's
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the what was it? AE 600 is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they call it the active EQ instead of dynamic EQ, but yeah, same thing. And that, especially like the way they sing, it's like a lot of percussive stuff and different frequency ranges. I don't know. That thing has allowed me to dial in their vocal sound more than anything else. So,
are you hitting it hard across across multiple? It's not a multi-band compressor. It's a dynamic EQ.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And are you laying into it hard in certain areas, or?
I am definitely like the mid, anywhere between say 500 and 2K. I mean, there are some really specific spots, especially with 58s, with Beta 58s. But so it really is a kind of few hot spots, but I do let it kind of like hit pretty hard. And
that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, there's two things you're going to be potentially trying to fix. It's a gear thing or vocal thing.
Yeah.
So for you, it's more of the issues with mic frequency response, or just.
I mean, I think it's more just way any singer sings, the dynamics of how they sing, and just kind of that's just. I think other vocalists too. Like when I was mixing Khalid last year for a few weeks, and I came in. My friend CJ who does that gig had a pretty had his mix going, but I was just kind of there to run the first couple of weeks of the tour, and kind of I threw that plugin in there, and it really kind of brought out his vocal in a way that it, like really translated into the arenas, because he's a really soft dynamic singer too. And
this kind of like I don't know if we want to go down this road, but I'm gonna make a general statement here, and maybe you guys will agree, but there is definitely a generation of artists right now that came up solely in a bedroom. And most of the artists that I work with up to my career, up to this point, were people who hashed it out in clubs for years and had to scream over those amps to kind of develop their voice. And we go from bedroom developed artists to in-ears in a large venue setting. And what I've kind of noticed is there's a lot of quiet singers, and it's like maybe it's a trend. I've noticed it.
No, totally. I mean, the best. I mean, the loudest singer I work with is. With this band called The Hold Steady, Craig Finney. I mean,
I love that band.
They came up playing punk clubs, and I toured with them years ago, doing like small clubs all around. But he screams at that mic, and it's awesome, because that's what, even more than like pop music, really, like his vocal needs to be so out there because there's so much other like loud guitars and stuff. So, but it's easy, it's fun.
That's a good point. When a band's coming up and like they're kind of getting fast tracked on Warner Brothers or other, I don't know if that's a movie studio or a record label. I don't know these days, but it's like I've seen it like working out here at festivals as like a systems guy or whatever, that you get like K-Walk at like Weenie Roast. We've all done Weenie Roast, and you get the first band on the day, and like they're there with their record label people. This is the biggest show they've done, and I've had this happen to me where it's like. They're literally just like, hey, by the way, here's your brand new set of JH Audio or whatever, UE in-ears. Like, here you go. And then turn around to the monitor guy, like, by the way, they're using in-ears for the first time. You're mixing, and there's no sound check. And it's like, who's doing this to these bands, But they get put on these in-ears right away, which obviously, what we talked about earlier, I think it's great for a band on ears to keep the stage volume down. But I think Vince is right. Like, you almost have to get the band to go out for a couple months and play with wedges and guitar amps and clubs and get used to like how to play without all this stuff before,
Well,
and then put the ears in, you know?
I don't know if I mean, honestly, I don't know. I that's not the point I was totally trying to make. Maybe you're right. I mean, my whole thing is that you're given what you're given in life. Like we don't get to kind of dictate the overarching kind of realities of what the music business turns into year after year. But you do have a small window for sure with an artist. If you can't fix those guys that show up at the festival. There's no that's an unfixable situation. But I have worked with artists where you have like maybe a 6 month window. Maybe it's their first big tour, and maybe they're just figuring out how to do it all. And you can't. And if you have you have to have a monitor engineer who's willing too. I've also been in a situation where the monitor engineer is like, I just give them what they want, and that's actually not the job. And I think it's super important to remember that it is a team sport, and you need to kind of like really reinforce that with the people around you. And I've had positive influences. If you don't get to that person in that window, though, their schedules just get busier, and those bad habits just get cemented. And honestly, like, I know a lot of people out there mixing artists that are fighting a losing battle because they're just trying to fix it with gear.
Yeah, it always starts at the source, right? Every sound.
Yeah.
I mean, and there is, you know, it is one of the fun things about working with artists. You know, so, you know, we've all worked at clubs too, where you're just like, whatever comes at you, like they're playing, you make it sound as good as you can. Next band, you know. But when you're working with an artist, you can really kind of work with them. Yeah, I mean, you know,
I think that's like, it's a hugely important and under talked about. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's another part out. One thing I like about working with artists too, you know, you're learning, you're teaching them some, they teach you some. I don't know, you're working together to carry out this creative vision. Which
It's art, man. It's not you're using tech to make art. It's not, the tech isn't the end result. The art is the end result, and people forget that.
That reminds me a lot of a story, Vince, about that you told me from when you were working in that club in Chicago, for as far as really like working with artists and creating that art. That one time when you were behind the console and the entire audience turned around and flipped you off.
Why are you gonna?
All right, gotta tell a story, Vince.
This is the second show I ever mixed. Whatever. I'll make it brief, but
where was it?
This was at the Double Door in Chicago, no longer existing. I've seen some of the best. I mean, this was a 500 cap club that punched well above its weight. I mean, saw Sonic Youth there. A bunch of other really great bands through the years came and played, like a lot of Lollapalooza after parties there and stuff. And it was really lucky to work there because it was small enough that bands were either on their way up or on their way down. So either way, they probably didn't have an engineer. So for me, it kind of I got to mix sometimes 5 bands a night for years and years on end. And while no one was really paying attention, but my second show in, the band brought a front of house guy, and he was feeding back in the subs all night. I was on monitors, sold out show, dripping sweat from the ceiling. That kind of a like middle of summer Chicago, just disastrous hot night with just people crammed in over capacity. And the singer, she started kind of arguing with me on stage about the feedback, you know, and I was kind of like, it's not me, you know, not happening. And finally we got to the point where we were kind of almost screaming at each other. And so I just muted everything and it was still happening. So I said, it's not me. And she said, you know what? So she gets in the mic and she said, everyone in here, this guy is ruining the sound of this show. Everyone, and it was just like, fuck you. And so 600 people, I was mortified, you know? And so the only reason I didn't get fired is because even though I was a complete mess, everyone around me was even more of a mess, and got called into the principal's office afterwards. And like, well, we can't fire him because no one else is going to work here for peanuts. So ultimately, I got talked into staying. I quit essentially, and I got talked into staying by the production manager, who basically told me, probably because he didn't want to hire anyone else, he said, well, you can quit, or you can look at it this way. That was probably the worst thing that'll ever happen to you. From this day on, your job will only get easier. And I'm an idiot, and they were paying me in booze, so I stayed.
Yeah, those were the days. I was working at the Empty Bottle probably about the same time you were doing that.
Yeah.
Down the street. So yeah, same day.
But still an important lesson though. Again, like, you know, point of that being that those crazy things happen when we're coming up and you don't think anything about it, but now you look back on those little moments and you're like, man, like, you don't know how true that is, you know, even down the line now, Vince, you're mixing, you know, Maroon 5 in stadiums, and probably the same thing, you know. So quite often I've seen in the newspaper that the whole audience in the stadium turns around to you and flicks you off.
People, man, it's an occupational hazard when you do your job in front of roomfuls of people. Everyone gets an opinion.
All right, guys. So I'm going to go through a couple questions that people sent in before this webinar. And
I'm scared.
A couple of them have to do band-specific stuff. Vince, did you do the Super Bowl with Maroon 5?
Yeah, I was there.
Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah.
I know kind of so people know, usually if we're touring with bands and we're going to like television or something, we're not really touching the console that much. So can you explain like who was mixing the broadcast and the live?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, man, I think it's important to remember that, like, as an engineer, the first time I ever did anything on TV was the Jimmy Kimmel Show with, man, this is a band that doesn't exist anymore and no one would remember anyway. But I was politely shown the door, essentially, in the control room and asked to get the hell out. And ultimately, it's like what I've kind of learned through the years is that our jobs aren't about like pushing faders. Our jobs are about steering a ship towards an outcome. And it can't be an ego thing. And so with the Super Bowl, like I don't even know, it's such a, I mean, I could talk about that for 3 hours, but ultimately they have a broadcast team. The halftime show at the Super Bowl is a completely separate production entity from the rest of the entire football game. And the NFL is there to remind you that it is a football game and it is not a concert. And so everything you do, it takes second to that going on. So you get very limited rehearsal time. I was in a truck about a kilometer of fiber optic cable away, and we had like 3 run-throughs total on site, and that was it. So they have a broadcast guy there. I'm working with them. We're bouncing mixes. I'm taking them back, making sure they sound good on all different formats. And I don't remember what was the initial question? You want to know who was mixing it and how?
Yeah, I just like talk about the experience. Yeah, I mean, you know,
there's a guy. The year we did it, Paul Sandweiss was behind the console, but just as important, they have a whole team of playback engineers as well, and we some of it's like a hybrid performance. But you know, a lot of people go there and they kind of pantomime a performance, but what Maroon 5 really wanted to do is show a live performance. So those vocals were straight up live, not auto-tuned. Guitars were live. Like a lot of it really was live, and I think it was a risk. And I was really happy with how it turned out, though. You know, a lot of it was just kind of managing expectations. And you're also putting on, there were 3 other artists in there with them, and they all have, I mean, the control room is 1/3 of a semi truck with a console and 3 guys working, and then another 10 people standing there like this, all that want to have an opinion. And part of that was just kind of making sure. I think the hardest thing about it was trying to get everybody's what they wanted achieved to happen, and also really running interference between everyone else and the engineer who needed to do his job, so without like losing his focus at the time.
Yeah. What was the question? I just had a question for you. Sorry, I spaced it. Oh yeah. So did you have auto-tune ready to go just in case? Because I mean, like a lot of artists I've worked with recently, getting on television, everyone's like, give me auto-tune.
So yeah, we went to Guitar Center and we bought a PV mixer that had an auto-tune button on it.
Oh no, that wasn't you. That was the other one.
Yeah. So Travis Scott has a very affected auto-tune, like, you know, effect in his voice, and what they kind of showed up with was this PV auto-tune, like legit from Guitar Center, and that's not going to work in a broadcast situation. So we had auto-tune set up to try to create the effect for Travis Scott vocal. It's situationally dependent. There's a lot of times where if it's, I hate to do auto-tune live. I don't mind touching things up in post, but I hate to do it live because it's just going to push you to the next nearest note in the song. And if your singer isn't already within a semitone, you're going to find yourself deep in the weeds on some really weird things where it's going to throw the notes around.
You can't be 50% wrong with auto-tune, you know?
Yeah, you have to be close. So for me, I knew how hard Adam was working with his vocal coach and just preparing for this leading up to it. And I just didn't think the risk was worth it. You know, I mean, it didn't seem worth it when I thought we were really prepared going in.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we were using, I've been using autotune. I was using autotune for one artist that it would like really made a huge difference. But he was young and like he wouldn't practice. Again, it all starts from the source, right? He wasn't like warming up right and like going through the exercises and going out there and making sure that he was putting his best voice out there every night.
Man,
it was
you
just
have
kind
to
of
do
like,
that
oh yeah,
stuff.
autotune, you know?
Yeah, and that's another. There's another man that that's a whole other podcast, and it's easy to get cynical and say, well, they need to work on this or whatever. But again, it's one of those things where you're given what you're given, and trends are changing. But I don't think just like being an athlete, like you're not going to get better if you're not constantly working on it, and some people just aren't going to do that. So that is the reality. But with the Super Bowl, frankly, in that situation, no, man. I mean, I was really, really proud of the fact that it was a pretty authentic situation.
Cool. And as far as like you handling the mix for the actual stadium.
Oh no, I wanted nothing to do with that. So the way it works at the Super Bowl, and obviously people are obviously, it was weird how unfamiliar I was with the setup, even having watched it my entire life. But they have 600, or I think it was 400 volunteers that pay to be there, that push this set on stage and in 6 minutes. So it's 400 people, 6 minutes. And part of the set was a row of set carts with some JBL powered speakers, kind of like arced back. And that was the whole arena sound system. The whole point of the arena mix was just coverage only. It wasn't, because again, the NFL, it's their game. You're lucky to be there. We're getting you in, we're getting you out. So, ATK has a bunch of great mixers. We gave them stems. They balanced the mix out. And I thought it would have been, with my hands full in broadcast, I thought it would have been just like, it would have been a lot of ego for me to go in there like after the fact and have a lot of opinions about it. They were doing a great job.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and if I'm sitting in a broadcast truck ever, like that's all I'm doing, like,
yeah,
usually like that's gotta be the focus, so, all right, cool. Thanks. And I'm just gonna keep going down these questions here, guys. We got a bunch. Hope you don't mind staying a little later. Jay, Queens of the Stone Age, they tend to change their set list in the middle of shows often. That's what I'm told.
Yeah, very much so.
Are you using macros or scenes or anything? So if you're, say, like, I gotta get this song up, are you doing that, or are you just kind of pushing faders right and going through the show?
With Queens of the Stone Age, I did end up having scenes on the SSL, and the only thing it was doing was muting background vocals that weren't singing and just changing some effects. With the last two albums that they've done, Josh got really interested and intricate, I guess, in the vocal effects of having like even just the certain reverb that flies up on one song, and really into that whole thing. So I ended up going through with him and programming a bunch of song-specific effects. So that's the only thing that was changing in the snapshots. But yeah, I mean, we get the set list, so you kind of look at it, just throw it away, and like half the time he'd come up and the first song was on the set list, they'd play, and then after that, he'd just be like, Millionaire, like, and then you're like, cool, that's out of the way, and like there you are in your console, just like, whoa, where is it, trying to find it. But if I didn't get to it, it wouldn't matter. Nothing drastic was coming on. So,
cool.
But that's what made it so exciting, is that every day you never knew what was going to happen. With other artists I've worked for, where you go out for a year and play the same set, nine months into it, you're like, oh yeah, the show's over.
I've been there.
Yeah.
All right. So how involved in system tuning are you guys? Are you like really leaning on system engineers just 100%, or are you kind of getting involved and looking at smart and stuff?
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, I mean, I probably have a different response from Jay, but just having a studio background and starting in clubs, like I'm sometimes I know just enough to be dangerous with the systems. I work very, very closely, and I need someone who's very strong and confident in their abilities and can also explain themselves. I feel like it's a hallmark of understanding. If you can't communicate what you're doing, and we can't get on page on what our strategies are, it's just not going to work out. So I view that relationship as maybe the most single important relationship at this point in my career.
What,
so
not
yeah.
You and I? Oh
yeah, no.
Bye. See you guys.
See you later. Yeah,
I should come out and be your systems guy.
I don't know if you can put up with me. I hear I'm a pain in the ass.
I know.
I want you to come out with me, man. Jay, like
Yeah.
the best mix I've ever had is when you were system teching the show that I did.
Oh, thank you. The best mix I ever heard through the system, my systems tech, was you mixing, Scott. So, all right, Vince, you're out. I'm with Scott. See ya.
That's fine. That's fine. We had a good run anyway. I don't know. What about you, Jay? You have a bit more of a background in that. I mean, I've never, I don't know. I just feel like if, I'm there to mix the show, and I'm really, really focused on the fact that the show that comes out of my desk every night, night after night, should be exactly the same. And so I just want a systems guy that can be on board with that. But Jay has I mean, you've done a lot more systems teching than I have.
I'm a bit different. I do a lot of systems teching stuff as well as mixing, and I enjoy that almost as much as I enjoy mixing. I get as much out of that when you really get a rig dialed in, and I find it as much as a challenge. So I really enjoy it. So I've had the same system engineer, Dan Bloom, for the past 5-6 years, and we have a great relationship together. He's one of the best guys out there for sure. He's also a good system engineer. But for a while, I found myself, just because I was bored and I wanted to do it, I was like doing a lot, like all the smart time alignment and tuning and all stuff like that. And then I realized Dan was like completely overqualified to just be sitting out there, like, slinging speakers and watching me do stuff. So,
dude, that's a really good point. If you're spending your time doing someone else's job, what aren't you doing for yours? And what is that other person there for? I mean, they're the expert in that.
Exactly. So then at that point, I was like, well, this is done. Like, I realized he was getting really bored. So he started doing all the system, tuning and stuff like that. I'd still throw a song up at the end and listen and kind of do the final like EQ in the system, because I kind of take it like Chris Raybould. I was watching something he did. He said the same thing. Like, I kind of want to know where all the bodies are hidden, and if I'm tuning the rig and I know, okay, well, the room's doing this here, or like there's a weird slap coming over there. When the show starts, I'm mixing. I know, like, oh, I remember I took out this 160 thing earlier, and I like boosted this high end thing earlier. So I kind of have an idea, like a roadmap of where to get to. But I see, I see both ways working. Vince's way and my way. Even though my way is right and Vince's way is wrong, but somehow Vince still has a gig, so that's cool.
Yeah.
How do you guys generally feel about Kempers and Fractals, direct guitar stuff?
I think it's all about the right tool for the job. 1975 was all Kempers, and it was amazing. We had two, A rig and a B rig that floated around. And every single day, a lot of times, like, going to do festivals, you didn't get a sound check or anything like that. And just knowing that when, that first note's going to be exactly the same as what it was. The last album cycle with 1975, it was tube amps. And it's like, every other day, because we're air freighting stuff or bumping around in trucks, like, a tube would get jostled or worn down. And like every day it's like, oh, the guitar doesn't sound the same. The mic placement's not the same. So for something like that, I think it's fantastic. Something like Queens of the Stone Age or the War on Drugs, I'm probably going to say that a lot of their sound is coming from that tube amplifier, or with Queens of the Stone Age, all solid state amplifiers. But, and if something does go a bit akimbo or it is a bit different, that's part of their sound. It's the fact that it isn't the same every day. So
I feel like people, like, especially like War on Drugs, like he's such a geek about that stuff. He's going to notice, it's like they're crafting a specific sound. That totally makes sense to me, But yeah, I think about switching Haim over, to Kempers or Fractals or whatever.
I feel like an artist like Haim would be perfect for the Fractal or Kemper thing,
Yeah, totally.
What do you do in Maroon 5, Vince? Do you guys have guitars?
Yeah, there's some guitars. Everything is now Axe Effects, except for the bass rig, which is loud as fuck. But even in an arena, I'm like,
is that a model?
How is the PA not on right now? It's so loud. But yeah, man. I mean, they've had a lot of setups through the years. I think same thing. Man, I'm gonna say this, and I promise it's not just for convenience, but like, when you are air freighting 20,000 pounds of equipment to every show, and the guitar rig, the old guitar, James Valentine's old guitar rig was more cases and weighed like twice as much as my entire front of house setup. You kind of have to reevaluate what's And when like artists like Metallica and probably Foo Fighters and some others I've heard have been getting really great fractal sounds and tones through the years, like you can't deny the validity of that. So we kind of made the switch over the past year. And really when I started with them about 2 years ago, they were really interested in the idea. And anytime an artist comes to me and they're like, we want to try this, my answer is always absolutely. You know, I'm never going to put up a roadblock. I want to try it too. So we've made the switch, and it's been good. It's been super consistent. I think with any of those things, though, the success 100% relies on the fact that someone, doesn't matter who, is spending like an untold amount of hours actually like programming that so it sounds great, because they just don't sound great unless you spend the time.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. You have a good guitar tech that can really get it there.
You need that. Yeah.
For sure. All right, so a couple more questions here, guys. Let's take one from Mike here. This is awesome. How does broadcast mixing compare to studio mixing or live front of house mixing? I know, Jay, you've been doing a ton of broadcast stuff. Can you talk about maybe just some general broadcast mixing tips, concepts, how you approach it?
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate to end up with a little broadcast mixing gig here during this whole thing for a virtual reality streaming band thing that's happening here in LA. And I've mixed some broadcast stuff before. I've sat in broadcast trucks for my bands that I work for, but this is the first time like actually just being the broadcast guy. And I actually, when I got the gig, I called Vince up. And I was like, dude, tell me everything not to do.
He just called me up to brag. He's like, hey,
yeah, no. Vince gave me a really good tip, and I think it's one of the most important things to just mix at a really quiet volume. I mean, like you can make anything. I feel like you can make anything. And probably this goes to front of house mixing as well. You can make anything good, like crushing it, sounding loud, you know. But mixing at a really low volume, if that sounds good at that low volume, it's going to sound good at any volume. So that part was good. I found that the amount of EQ I was doing to things was like dramatic compared to like I was on drums in this broadcasting EQing stuff that I would cry if I was doing that, in a live setting. But I feel like with the broadcasting, it's all about kind of just carving room out for other things, and you're not worried about this translating to a giant sound system as well. So, but I know Vince could probably speak a lot more to that with the recording background as well.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I can. I think you're really in it right now, and it's kind of like being on the one side of the equation where you're kind of trying to direct someone to it. But when you're in that seat, it's really great to. I mean, I think it's exciting, and I enjoy doing it sometimes more than mixing front of house at this point. But I don't know, man. I mean, things gotta hit. You have to feel something without volume, and I think that's the trick, and like, otherwise, I think the rest of the rules still apply.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's really cool as well that, for myself and Vince as well, probably Scott, you too, for the past, however many years, 6-7 years, we've mixed, a handful of artists. So, for me, I've mixed 4 bands in the past 7 years. So you're so used to hearing the same thing every day, and you don't have to like dial up new sounds every day. It's kind of just like, did it sound like yesterday? Good. But for me with this broadcast thing, it's like I get a different artist coming every day. You have no clue what the stuff sounds like. You have no clue what's going to happen when they all play together. So I've come to rely a lot. Everything's in a group. I got like a drum bus, bass bus, guitar bus. So I'm doing a lot of processing throughout the groups, and also just relying on the input meters as well. It's like to really know where something's going to hit, just, getting that input meter to like that -20, -18 mark on the Digico. And, I know that that's going to hit the compressor the same way that it normally hits. And you kind of just have all these things set up to hopefully get yourself into the best position when the band actually starts playing.
Yeah. I have a feeling we'll be talking about broadcast stuff a lot over the next year.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a course on it. Actually, I haven't announced it yet, but I'm going to build a course on it. So if anybody's out there interested in that, expect that coming up this summer. But yeah, it's as more people are needing to generate some revenue, play some online shows. I think it's going to be important stuff to talk about. So, all right, one more question and then we'll wrap it up, guys. Can we talk about, Christian is asking about gain structure. How, of course, gain structure is one of the most important things in audio, and I teach about it all, like, a lot in my courses. But, and you were talking about Prince, like, really gaining stuff up at the preamp before. Do you kind of have you guys approach kind of gain structure the same, or what are your kind of approaches for getting sounds into the console, and then how you're managing it all the way to the master bus?
Go ahead, Vince.
Go.
You started off, and I'll tell them the right way how to do it.
Yeah, perfect. That's worked well so far. Yeah.
Scott's like, why did I have these two guys on this thing? I should have known better.
Hit that off button. Man, I don't know. I mean, I think just starting an analog gain structure mattered a lot, but what you kind of realized in the analog environment, you had two things working for you, which was that preamps behave differently the hotter and cooler that you ran them. I remember specifically on the, it doesn't really matter. I remember there was a Yamaha desk that I used a lot, kind of in clubs, and like it would really start to compress and break up, and you could almost not insert a compressor and just like change the tone dramatically that way. But I guess for me, if I'm looking at my console, I really do, it matters less with the digital stuff because there's just a lot less sound imparted on it in the signal path. So, and it's weird to say that it matters less now for me, but I don't know, man. It's weird because I don't really think much about it. I'm putting my, if I'm building a mix for the first time, sure, I'm putting my faders up at Unity and I'm gaining up into them. But there are times where I want to hit gear harder, and so like I'll break those rules. I think it's important to just start with the rules and then break them. That's kind of how I look at it.
And I kind of come from the same thing as Vince. I learned mixing on an analog console, and some of the bigger shows I started to do at that sound company were on a Heritage 3000. And it's kind of, I feel like if people are kind of split down the middle in this, I've always come up with the way of fader at Unity, gain up into it, and with that analog gain structure going to the master bus. Other people will say, oh, but you don't want your hi-hat the same volume as your lead vocal or whatever. But for me, I've always found that my mixes work the best with all the faders at Unity. It also helped me to come back to knowing where I was. If I adjust something, I kind of know where my mix sits by bringing the faders back to Unity for myself.
That's a really good point.
And I'm also like slightly OCD, so with like neatness and stuff like that. So if like all the faders are all over the place in the console, my mind just I start like twitching a little bit. And I'm not actually kidding. Like I'm very like everything has a place. So that's been my my gain structure thing. And I know people who do the other way where the faders are all over the place and they're hitting a certain level on the preamp, and their mixes sound slamming as well. So I feel like it's just finding whatever works best for you.
I mean, that's kind of what I do. My faders are all over the place. I think ride gains a little hotter than a lot of people on the input, but yeah, for something like the hi-hat, I'm bringing it up, and so the little compressor can do its thing where it needs to, and I just want to make sure I'm hitting my dynamics processing hard enough, and then duck the fader. So, but that's just
It's interesting. It's interesting. Something so important in what we do, like you said, gain structure. It's one of those important before anything else. Like gain structure is where your mix is built, and the three of us can all do it a completely different way and all end up with great results. It kind of just makes it show that it's really about finding whatever works best for you, and sticking to it.
On that note, I think it's a great way to end. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Vince, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, super fun. Good to chat with you and see you in whatever this is, virtual reality. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll be together on some gigs here. It's sometime in the future. and
looking forward to it.
Yeah, and me too. But thanks again, guys, and thanks everybody for coming by. And I'll see you next Tuesday.
And thanks for Prince for this being that little bird chirping the whole time over there, being like, turn it off.
Thanks, Prince.
Yeah. See you guys.